In today's fast-paced, digitally connected world, sharing has become second nature to us. We overshare our thoughts, our emotions, our every moment. Whether it's posting a status on social media, sending a quick text to a friend, or venting about the day's frustrations, we often feel compelled to voice what's going on inside our minds. It's understandable, after all. We live in an era where connection is just a click away. But here's the problem, not everything we feel or think needs to be shared. In fact, some things are better left unsaid. The truth is, in this age of constant sharing, we've lost sight of something incredibly valuable: silence. Silence isn't just the absence of noise, it's a powerful tool for preserving our mental clarity, emotional health, and overall peace of mind. And if there's anyone who understood the art of silence and discernment, it was the Buddha. The Buddha's teachings are rich with wisdom on how silence, discretion, and mindful communication can protect our inner peace. Imagine how much lighter you would feel if you didn't feel the need to overshare every worry, fear, or fleeting emotion. The path to true inner peace isn't just about filling the void with words, it's about knowing when to keep things to ourselves. It's about learning which parts of our lives, our regrets, our desires, our struggles, are best kept private. In today's video, we're going to explore 8 specific things that the Buddha warned us never to share with others. These teachings aren't just ancient wisdom, they're tools you can apply today to protect your peace and avoid unnecessary emotional drama. Whether it's sharing too much about your past regrets, your dreams, or your fears, these insights will guide you in making more mindful choices about what you share and what you keep to yourself. Why is this so important? Because every time we share something we shouldn't, we risk creating unnecessary emotional chaos, not just in our own lives, but in the lives of those around us. So, let's take a step back, reflect, and learn how silence can be your greatest ally in the pursuit of a more peaceful, fulfilling life. Join me as we dive into these profound Buddhist teachings, and discover the power of keeping certain things to yourself for the sake of your peace and well-being. Trust me, after watching this video, you'll have a new perspective on the things you choose to share, and the things you'll wisely keep to yourself. 1. Your regrets. Regret is a weight that seems to grow heavier the longer we carry it. The more we dwell on past mistakes, the more it consumes us. In the teachings of the Buddha, this attachment to the past is a key cause of suffering. We get stuck in the what-ifs and could-have-beens, unable to let go of the things we cannot change. The Buddha understood this well. He spoke of the power of attachment, not just to things, but to ideas, to outcomes, to even our own actions. When we are attached to regret, we keep ourselves bound to moments that have long since passed. And in doing so, we lose sight of the present. It's easy to fall into this trap. How many of us have spent nights replaying decisions we wish we could take back? Whether it's a failed relationship, a missed opportunity, or words we can never unsay. Those moments become like chains, holding us in a place where we can never truly move forward. The more we fixate on these past actions, the more we feed a cycle of self-blame. We tell ourselves that if we had just done things differently, maybe things would be better now. But in reality, this mindset does nothing but keep us stuck, reliving pain over and over. The Buddha taught that true freedom comes when we release our attachment to the past, when we stop allowing our regrets to control us. Only then can we open ourselves to the potential for growth and healing. I know this from personal experience. I've been there, caught in the web of regret, There were times in my life when I couldn't stop thinking about the mistakes I'd made, times when I wished I could turn back time and make different choices. I would talk about these regrets endlessly with friends, hoping that they could offer some kind of relief or at least validate my feelings. I wanted them to understand my pain, to tell me that it was okay to feel bad about the things I had done. But over time, I began to notice something strange. Each time I shared my regrets, I didn't feel better, I felt worse. My mistakes didn't become any less painful. Instead, they grew bigger, louder, more overwhelming. That's when I began to realize that by constantly revisiting my regrets, I was only giving them more power. Every time I spoke about them, I was reinforcing their hold on me. It wasn't until I started to apply the Buddha's teachings on detachment that I found a way out of that cycle. Instead of obsessing over what I couldn't change, I started asking myself a different question: what can I learn from this? Suddenly, my mistakes weren't just failures, they were lessons. And the more I accepted that these experiences were a part of my journey, the more peace I began to find. I stopped seeking validation from others, stopped needing to talk about my regrets over and over. Instead, I focused on being present. I allowed myself to grow from the past, not by clinging to it, but by letting go of it. I began to understand that regret only has power over us if we give it that power. If we let go of our attachment to the past, we free ourselves to embrace the present and the future. And in doing so, we open the door to healing and peace. 2. Your inner peace. Inner peace is a fragile yet invaluable treasure. The Buddha spoke of peace not as something that can be found outside of ourselves, but as something that must be cultivated within. Through practices like mindfulness, meditation, and detachment, we learn to nurture a deep sense of calm that remains unaffected by the external chaos of the world around us. But peace, as the Buddha taught, requires protection. It is not something to be paraded or shared too freely. Because once we begin to vocalize our tranquility, we open the door to external forces that can disturb it. Whether it's seeking validation for our calm or trying to convince others of our serenity, these actions pull us away from the true nature of peace. When we share our peace too loudly, it's like inviting the world to disrupt it. The opinions of others, their judgments, and even their expectations can easily sway our inner equilibrium. In a world constantly filled with distractions, where noise and opinions are just a click away, holding on to our peace requires a level of discernment. It's not about showing others how calm we are, but rather about maintaining an internal state of balance that is not reliant on the external circumstances. True peace is not dependent on the approval of others or on the silence of our surroundings. It is a quiet strength that arises from within and remains steady regardless of what is happening around us. I've experienced this firsthand. There was a time in my life when I confused the peace I felt inside with something I needed to share. I would tell my friends and family how centered I felt, how calm I had become, hoping they would admire my progress. I thought that by sharing it, I could invite others into my sense of tranquility. But the more I spoke about it, the more I found that it began to slip away. The reactions of others, whether positive or critical, started to disturb my peace. Instead of holding on to my calm, I was constantly adjusting it to fit the expectations of those around me. It wasn't until I came across the Buddha's teachings on detachment that I realized what I was doing wrong. I was turning my inner peace into a performance, something to be admired, something to prove. But peace doesn't need to be demonstrated or validated. It simply needs to be protected, quietly nurtured in the depths of our own hearts. I stopped sharing my sense of tranquility so freely, and instead, I started focusing on the practices that truly nourished it: meditation, reflection, and simply being present with myself. It didn't take long before I felt a shift. My peace became more resilient, more steady. I no longer needed to explain how calm I was, nor did I seek approval from others. I began to understand that true peace is found in silence, in stillness, and in not letting the world disturb what I had so carefully cultivated. Now, I guard my inner peace like a sacred treasure. I don't feel the need to share it, because I know that when I keep it to myself, it only grows stronger. Peace, I've learned, is not about what others see, it's about what we protect within. 3. Your material successes. The Buddha's teachings remind us that attachment to material success is one of the main causes of suffering. In a world that constantly pushes us to define our worth through wealth, social status, or personal achievements, it's easy to fall into the trap of believing that our value is measured by what we own or what we accomplish. We are bombarded with messages that success equals happiness, more things, more recognition, more validation. But the Buddha teaches us that true fulfillment doesn't come from external possessions or accolades. Instead, it's something deeper, something rooted in our own sense of self and spiritual growth. The pursuit of material success, while not inherently wrong, can lead us down a path of competition, envy, and dissatisfaction. And when we share our material successes with others, it can stir up feelings of jealousy, resentment, or disconnection, which can poison both our relationships and our own happiness. In my own life, I can remember a time when I felt the need to share every material success with anyone who would listen. Whether it was a new car, an upgrade at work, or a vacation I'd taken, I felt that these milestones needed to be celebrated. I believed that by sharing them, I would foster connection and receive validation for my hard work. I thought it would bring people closer to me, that they would see me as successful and admirable. But over time, I started noticing a subtle shift in my relationships. Some people seemed uncomfortable with my enthusiasm, while others, perhaps unintentionally, began to distance themselves. I felt the joy I had over my achievements slowly diminishing, as if my excitement was being overshadowed by the reactions of others. It dawned on me that my attempts to impress were not bringing people closer, they were, in fact, creating a wall between us. This realization was humbling. I understood that I was allowing my happiness to be tied to things that, in the grand scheme of life, didn't truly matter. It wasn't the new car or the vacation that brought me fulfillment, it was the sense of peace I felt inside when I was content with who I was, not what I had. The teachings of the Buddha on detachment helped me shift my perspective. I began to focus more on cultivating happiness from within, on finding joy in the simple moments, rather than looking to external accomplishments for validation. I stopped sharing my material successes so freely and started to recognize that the most meaningful things in life are often the ones we can't show off. A peaceful moment with loved ones, a quiet reflection on life's blessings, a sense of gratitude for just being alive, these are the true sources of contentment. Now, I share my successes more thoughtfully. I understand that my worth isn't defined by what I own or what I've achieved. It's defined by how I live, how I grow, and how I contribute to the world around me. And most importantly, I no longer need the approval of others to feel good about myself. The peace I find within is enough. I've learned that the richest rewards come not from accumulating more, but from appreciating what I already have, starting with the peace within my own heart. 4. Your negative thoughts. The Buddha often spoke about the power of the mind, particularly the influence of our thoughts. Negative thoughts, if allowed to run unchecked, have the potential to dominate our minds, shaping our actions and reactions. These thoughts can cloud our judgment and leave us trapped in cycles of self-doubt, frustration, and resentment. Buddhism teaches that mindfulness, being present with our thoughts and emotions without becoming consumed by them, is key to maintaining clarity. Right speech, too, is an essential practice in Buddhism, guiding us to speak in ways that are uplifting and constructive rather than destructive. When negative thoughts are shared too freely, they can not only affect our mental state but also spill over into our relationships, creating tension, stress, and anxiety in others. The Buddha's wisdom offers a simple yet powerful solution: silence. In silence, we can prevent the spread of negativity and instead focus on nurturing peace within ourselves. By choosing not to vocalize every frustration, we protect both our mental space and the emotional well-being of those around us. I can recall a time when I was caught in the habit of constantly sharing every negative thought that came to mind. Whether it was a complaint about my job, a frustration with a friend, or a lingering worry about the future, I found myself voicing my thoughts, thinking that releasing them would lighten the emotional load. I convinced myself that by venting, I would feel better, like I was getting things off my chest. But what I didn't realize was that each time I shared my negative thoughts, I wasn't releasing them at all. Instead, I was feeding them, giving them more energy and more space in my life. The more I spoke of my frustrations, the more they seemed to grow. And soon, negativity became a constant companion. Eventually, I found that the act of sharing my grievances wasn't bringing the relief I had hoped for. It was simply perpetuating the cycle of frustration and dissatisfaction. That's when I turned to the teachings of the Buddha on mindfulness and silence. I began practicing the simple act of pausing before speaking. When I felt a negative thought bubbling up, I gave myself a moment to reflect and sit with the feeling, rather than immediately vocalizing it. This pause allowed me to separate myself from the thought and recognize it for what it was, a fleeting emotion, not a truth that needed to be acted on. By taking a step back, I was able to process my thoughts more clearly and more calmly. Over time, this practice began to shift the way I engaged with negative thoughts. I found that when I did share, it came from a place of greater mindfulness, less reactive and more thoughtful. Negative thoughts no longer had control over my actions, and I no longer felt the need to share every frustration with others. Instead, I learned to manage them in silence, to observe them without letting them define me. This shift didn't just change my inner world, it also changed my relationships. I noticed that I was no longer burdening others with my negativity. And in turn, I felt less weighed down by the world around me. Now, I understand that not every thought needs to be voiced. Silence has become a tool for me to maintain mental clarity. And in doing so, I protect my peace, and the peace of those around me. In the stillness, I've found that I can let go of negativity more easily, creating space for more positive, constructive thoughts to take root. 5. Your personal struggles. There was a time when I believed that sharing every personal struggle was the only way to gain relief. Whether it was a falling out with a friend, a stressful project at work, or a difficult decision in my life, I'd find myself telling anyone who would listen, hoping that sharing my pain would help lighten the load. I thought that by opening up, I could gain support, advice, or simply validation that my feelings were justified. But I soon noticed something troubling. The more I shared, the more my problems seemed to grow. Instead of finding clarity, I often found myself more confused, burdened with other people's opinions and advice that didn't always align with what I truly needed. The Buddha's teachings on mindfulness and self-reliance began to shift my perspective. I realized that constantly sharing every personal struggle could create unnecessary drama, cluttering not only my mind but also my relationships. People, no matter how well-meaning, couldn't always provide the insight I needed. Often, their advice was shaped by their own experiences, which didn't necessarily match the path I was on. The more I invited others into my struggles, the more external voices I had to contend with, and the less space I had to hear my own. Instead of continuing this pattern, I decided to embrace silence and solitude as a means of dealing with my challenges. It wasn't about keeping everything to myself in a closed-off, unhealthy way, but about allowing myself the time and space to process my thoughts and emotions without the pressure of seeking approval or solutions from others. I started to meditate more often, using the quiet time to reflect deeply on my struggles. I gave myself permission to feel frustrated, uncertain, or sad without feeling the need to explain or justify those feelings to anyone. It was a freeing experience, one that helped me develop greater self-awareness and a deeper understanding of my own emotional landscape. As time passed, I found that I could approach my struggles with greater calm and patience. I didn't feel the need to rush for an answer or search for someone to tell me what to do. Instead, I trusted in my own ability to find a solution or simply to ride out the storm with mindfulness and resilience. By keeping my struggles to myself more often, I gave myself the space to work through them in my own way, without the interference of outside noise. Now, I share only when it feels truly necessary. When I know that my sharing will not be driven by a need for validation or sympathy, but by a genuine desire to connect or seek advice from someone I trust. In keeping my struggles more private, I've learned to embrace the quiet strength that comes from self-reliance. And I've discovered that, more often than not, the most peaceful and wise response to life's challenges is not to share them indiscriminately, but to work through them with mindfulness, patience, and faith in my own capacity to overcome. 6. Your fears. For much of my life, I was plagued by fears about what the future held. Whether it was uncertainties about my career, relationships, or simply how I was growing as a person. These fears consumed me. I believed that if I shared them with others, it would somehow ease the weight I was carrying. But what I didn't realize was that by vocalizing my fears, I only brought them to life in a way that made them feel more tangible, more powerful. Each time I spoke about them, I could see the anxiety reflected in the eyes of those I shared them with, and that only deepened my own sense of dread. Over time, I began to realize that fear, in its essence, is rooted in attachment, the attachment to an uncertain future, to things I can't control. The Buddha's teachings reminded me that mindfulness is the key to transforming fear into something less overwhelming. Instead of letting my fears spill out into every conversation, I learned to face them in silence. I realized that fear often grows stronger when we externalize it. But when we turn inward, we can see it for what it truly is, just a thought, a fleeting emotion that comes and goes. Meditation became my refuge. When fear would arise, instead of reacting to it, I allowed myself to sit with it. I breathed deeply, acknowledging its presence without letting it take control of my mind or my actions. Slowly, I began to understand that the more I resisted fear, the more it lingered. But when I met it with calmness and acceptance, It began to lose its grip on me. I no longer felt the need to seek reassurance or validation from others. I realized that the power to overcome fear had always been within me, it simply required patience and stillness. Now, when fear arises, I face it quietly within myself. I reflect on the things I can control and release the things I cannot. I still experience fear, but it no longer dictates my actions. It no longer runs rampant in my mind or influences my decisions. Instead, I treat it as a passing cloud in the sky, acknowledging its presence without allowing it to block the sun. When I do share my fears with others, I do so with purpose. Not as a way to unload my anxieties, but as an invitation to explore potential solutions or to seek guidance when it's truly needed. I've learned to choose my words carefully, focusing on what is constructive and moving toward peace, rather than merely expressing worry. In embracing silence and mindfulness, I've come to realize that fear loses its power when we stop feeding it with unnecessary words and allow ourselves to face it with clarity and courage. 7. Your doubts. For a long time, I carried doubts about my own abilities, whether it was in my career, my relationships, or even my personal growth. I often found myself questioning whether I was on the right path, whether I was capable of achieving what I hoped for. And in those moments of uncertainty, I turned to my friends and loved ones, sharing my doubts, hoping for reassurance. But instead of finding the comfort I sought, I often felt more insecure. Their responses, though well-meaning, sometimes left me feeling even more unsure about myself and the choices I was making. It wasn't until I started to look inward, embracing the Buddha's teachings on mindfulness, that I began to shift my perspective. I learned that doubt, while natural, can be a heavy burden. When I continually sought validation from others, I was allowing external opinions to dictate my sense of self. I was allowing doubt to control me instead of addressing it from within. The more I talked about my doubts, the more I fed them, and they only grew stronger. Through meditation and self-reflection, I began to see that doubts, like all thoughts, are transient. They arise, but they don't have to define me. I realized that true confidence doesn't come from external validation, it comes from trusting my own wisdom and understanding. By sitting quietly with my doubts, instead of immediately sharing them with others, I began to uncover the answers I had been seeking all along. The silence allowed me to connect with my inner self, helping me to see that my doubts weren't permanent, they were simply feelings that needed to be observed, not acted upon. Over time, I stopped seeking reassurance from others. I realized that the most important voice I could listen to was my own. Silence became a space where I could confront my insecurities without fear of judgment or the pressure to have an immediate solution. By allowing myself to reflect quietly, I could observe my doubts from a place of clarity rather than chaos. The more I practiced this, the more I began to trust myself. I no longer needed to share my doubts to seek comfort, I had learned to find peace within myself. Now, when doubt arises, I don't shy away from it, nor do I voice it to others immediately. I sit with it, reflect on it, and ask myself where it's coming from. I trust that with time and mindfulness, the answers will come, not from external sources, but from the wisdom I've cultivated through stillness. In doing so, I've learned that doubts are not obstacles to be feared or avoided, they are simply opportunities for deeper self-understanding and growth. 8. Your failures. I used to hold on to my failures, replaying them in my mind over and over. I'd talk about them with friends and family, seeking comfort or sympathy, hoping that by sharing them, I could make sense of the disappointment I felt. But I eventually realized that doing this only kept me anchored to those moments of failure, as if they defined who I was. The more I shared, the more I fed the sense of loss. And the harder it became to let go and move forward. It wasn't until I began to embrace the Buddhist teaching of impermanence that I started to shift my perspective. The Buddha teaches us that nothing is permanent, not our successes. And certainly not our failures. They are simply moments in time. Experiences that come and go. Failure is not a reflection of our worth, but rather a part of the journey that helps us learn, grow, and ultimately reach higher levels of understanding. I learned that when we focus too much on failure, we allow it to become an identity, something we carry with us rather than something we learn from. By constantly sharing our failures, we give them more power, reinforcing the idea that they are significant enough to define us. But through mindfulness and reflection, I came to see that failure is just a stepping stone, not the end of the road. It's a moment to learn, to reassess, and to grow, but not something to be obsessed over. Now, when I experience failure, I don't immediately seek to share it with others. Instead, I take time to process it on my own. I reflect on what went wrong. But I don't let the failure take up space in my life longer than it needs to. I focus on what I can learn from the experience and how I can do better next time. I've learned to detach from the idea of failure as something negative or final. It's simply a part of the process, a lesson, not a burden. I've also learned to approach myself with more compassion when I fail. Instead of being hard on myself, I try to treat myself with the same understanding I would offer to a friend. Failure doesn't mean I'm not good enough, it simply means that I'm still learning, still evolving. By allowing myself the space to grow from each failure, I can let go of the shame or regret that might otherwise linger. In this way, failure no longer holds the same weight. It doesn't paralyze me or define me. It's a teacher, one that guides me toward greater self-awareness and understanding. Through this shift in perspective, I've found peace with my failures, seeing them not as setbacks, but as essential parts of my journey toward growth and enlightenment. As we reflect on the teachings of Buddhism, it becomes clear that not everything needs to be shared. In a world that often values constant communication and external validation, there's a profound strength in learning when to remain silent. Silence is not about withholding, it's about offering ourselves the time and space we need to process, heal, and grow without the noise of outside opinions clouding our path. By choosing to guard our inner peace, we allow ourselves to stay grounded and true to our own hearts, not influenced by the judgments or expectations of others. In moments of regret, fear, doubt, or even joy, Buddhism teaches us to discern carefully what we share and when. This practice of mindfulness, of being present with our emotions and thoughts, empowers us to speak with clarity and purpose. It also teaches us the gentle art of silence, which is not a void, but a space of deep understanding. It is through silence that we nurture the wisdom to know when to speak and when to simply listen, both to ourselves and to the world around us. In this balance, we find peace. And in peace, we find freedom, as we continue our journey toward inner peace. Let us remember that sharing doesn't always bring us closer to understanding, it can sometimes cloud our vision or invite unnecessary chaos. The real treasure lies in cultivating an inner world that is rich with clarity and calm. A place where we can navigate life's complexities with grace. By holding on to this peace, we not only protect our own tranquility but also create a safer space for others to do the same. I want to thank you for taking the time to join me in this exploration of mindfulness and the power of silence. I hope these reflections have inspired you to consider what you share, when you share it, and how you can protect your peace as you move forward. If this message resonated with you, I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Let's keep this conversation going, supporting each other in our journey to cultivate peace, mindfulness, and understanding. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you can continue to be part of this community. May you find moments of quiet reflection and deep inner peace throughout your day. Stay mindful, stay kind, and remember to protect your peace. It's the foundation of everything else. Thank you for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.